Russia claims to have foiled a Ukrainian drone attack on the Kremlin, alleging it was an attempt on President Putin's life. Now, this footage circulating on Russian Telegram channels shows the alleged attack and smoke rising above the main Kremlin palace. DW has not independently verified the footage. Kyiv denies involvement in the incident. Russia says it will retaliate when and how it sees fit. Well, let's get more on this from DW correspondents Nick Connolly in the Ukrainian capital and Jennifer Palka in Riga, where DW has been operating from since Russia authorities closed down our Moscow office. Welcome both. Can we start with you, Jennifer? And tell us more, if you would, about the Kremlin's claims.
Well, Russian media outlets report that 2 drones attacked the Kremlin. And as you can see in the footage that is spread on social media, an object is flying from the left frame and then exploding above the Kremlin. According to residents close to the Kremlin, they heard a noise that sounded like an explosion, saw a spark in the sky, and then saw people with flashlights at the Kremlin walls. The Kremlin says as a result of timely actions taken by the military and special services, the drones were rendered inoperable. They crashed, resulting in fragments being scattered around the area. But according to Russian media, there were no casualties nor material damage.
And so, Nick Connolly in Kiev, Ukraine is saying it wasn't us.
Certainly, we've had the presidential spokesman saying that they know nothing about these attacks in Moscow. More recently, a top advisor to Zelensky saying that this is also nothing to do with Ukraine, that this is down to basically partisans on the ground, internal processes within Russia, the opposition to the Putin regime up to this. Obviously, a lot of irony there, a lot of kind of indirect jokes there, but certainly not accepting any of the blame or the responsibility for this, and also positing the idea that this is somehow a planned Russian kind of false flag operation to justify further attacks on Ukraine, on civilians in Ukraine. And certainly we've got an air raid warning across the country here in Ukraine now, and the expectation of potentially some kind of Russian retribution.
OK, so Ukraine saying not us. But Nick, drone attacks on Russian infrastructure close to Ukraine have become more frequent recently. So regardless of official denials, is the presumption that Kyiv is behind them? And why the apparent increase in their frequency?
I think it's important to distinguish here between attacks on very obviously military targets and logistics targets near Ukraine and this alleged attack in Moscow, which is a lot further away and, as we know, a lot better defended. Lots of images doing the rounds in recent months of anti-aircraft, anti-air defense units in Moscow on the roofs of office buildings in central Moscow. So pretty extraordinary if it is true that Ukraine was able to launch weapons of this kind from Ukrainian territory and get them all the way to the walls of the Kremlin in the middle of Moscow. As for attacks on Russian-occupied Crimea, or more recently on the kind of nearer bits of Russian territory, yes, it does seem like these are Ukrainian attacks using commercially available Chinese drones, swarms of drones that overwhelm the defences that are just spread too thinly on the Russian side, as indeed here on the Ukrainian side. As for those kind of attacks on trains, train lines bringing oil to Russian forces, there is a sense that this could indeed be Russian opposition groups working potentially in some kind of coordination with the Ukrainians, but with their own boots on the ground. But obviously, as ever, we have very little opportunity to verify these claims. And for now, it had seemed that this was more about the kind of information war, the psychological effect, than about real impact on Russia's ability to fight a war against Ukraine.
OK, well, so Jennifer, there are bound to be questions about whether this alleged attack was organised within Russia or abroad, or even staged by Russia itself.
Yes, of course there will be questions, especially because of the frequency of drone attacks or explosions in the last month or week or even days, Phil. We also have to keep in mind that so far these reports are coming in from Russian state media. They have not been confirmed by Western media or experts. The only clear statement we have that comes from is the Kremlin and from Ukraine, which denies being involved. But there's also the possibility of Russia having staged this, trying to use it to legitimize the war in Ukraine. Ukraine. On May 9th, there will be a parade held on the Red Square to celebrate Russia's victory in World War II. So what better timing to evoke more patriotic feelings in society than showing them that the enemy is here, almost at their doorstep in the Kremlin?
Okay, thank you for that. Jennifer Palka in Riga and Nick Connolly in Kyiv. Thank you both.